Okay, well, thank you everybody for being a part of what we're doing. I've got a couple of notes that I'd like to make sure that I refer to ask some questions that we've thought about in advance. But one of the things that I will always do is go out to the audience, because this is really more for us to share ideas with you and to find some areas that we can discuss together. So please be thinking, because it's always a bit difficult to go out and then have everybody sort of staring at their shoes. So think about things that you might want to ask any of the leaders on stage. One of the things that I like to do is have you introduce yourself, because everybody can do a better job introducing themselves than any moderator can. So I'm just going to take a minute each, share whatever you want to share, and then we're going to jump in. So Lisa, I'll start with you.
All right, great. So my name is Lisa Enkel. I'm originally from Sweden, but I've been based here in Southeast Asia for the past 3 years, almost. Had a detour to San Francisco for a couple of years, where I also worked for a startup. So my background is in startups, and I have often taken on the CMO or head of marketing and product roles, either as a full-time or as interim positions, which is great, because then you can dig into something for a few months and then you can leave and move on. And in the beginning of the year, I was part of starting something called Antler here in Singapore. So Antler is what we call a startup generator. So we bring in individuals like Steve or other people who wants to start their own business, and then we connect them with other co-founders. We help them validate their different ideas. And if we believe in the team and the idea itself, we invest $100,000 into this very early stage company. And then we help them build these companies for another 3 months or so before we present them to other investors. And hopefully they live on for many, many years. So I'll say that we'll see how it goes. I'll be back in 10 years, and hopefully we'll have a few big IPOs and some acquisitions done by then. So that's what I do now. We have currently 62 founders from 22 countries at one of the WeWork locations here in Singapore, working extremely hard with their new companies. And it's, of course, extremely fun and rewarding. And we just opened up in Stockholm as well. So we're expanding.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, thanks Lisa. Barbara?
Yeah, I'm Barbara Guerpillon. I'm French, but I've been in Singapore for 17 years, so it's been a while. I've always been working in small companies. This is how we called them 10 years or 15 years ago. Now it's called startup. I had my own startup just before joining Unilever, an e-commerce platform, which was a massive fail, but it allowed me to learn so much that I've decided to join Unilever to run Unilever Foundry, which is our platform for engaging with startups from around the world. My role is really to, I think it's the best job in Unilever, because I still get very close to startup, understand what they do, but I also get into the Unilever business, understand what are the challenges, how they are working today, and how we can potentially fill the gaps with technology. So my role is to understand the brand strategy and the functions issues, and go and look for the right technology and the right startups. I'm supporting the business in Southeast Asia, but I'm looking for startups from around the globe. So I've been doing this for the last 3 years. Foundry is 4 years old, and we've done 150 pilots globally, and 45 of them are scaling up across our business. And just to give you some idea, when a startup is scaling with Unilever, we call a scale when a startup is able to work with at least 8 brands in 10 markets. And this is where we can start to talk about scale. So very recently, we have opened a co-working space within our headquarters. It was basically Foundry experimenting himself. It's been 18 months. We have today 60 startups. We have 90% occupancy rate. But we moved from being just a co-working space to building an ecosystem for startups to grow successfully in the region. So that's what I'm doing today.
Cool. Thanks, Barbara. Jeff?
Thank you. My name is Jeff. I'm from Singapore, first generation Singaporean. I spent 25 years in the advertising world, working with WPP and Publicis Group. So I've been here at All That Matters. Prior to this, it was called Digital Matters. Before that, content matters, and there was this music matters. So it used to be everything that mattered. Jasper felt that it could make money, he would make money from it. So there's a line for Jasper. But as you can see from this business, this event itself, it has morphed itself over the last 7-8 years. And the reason it has morphed is actually representative of my panelists and what we are doing. What used to be different industries have all come across the same because the world is changing in a different place and the relationships that we should do are different. So I came from the world where we was originally the original disruptors. So we used to go to marketers and big organizations like P&G, Johnson & Johnson, and show them new things. And then later on, all the startups started coming and wanted us to advertise for them. I remember meeting a small company in Sweden in 2010. Later on, it became known as Spotify. All right. One of the founders was the intern at my old company.
Oh, what company?
Starcom Midwest Group. Yeah, it was, they took a space on our building, or part of Blue Business. And then I thought I'd tell a story why I left the corporate world. I had a big fight with my global CFO one day in 2011. I wanted to take assignment for a big company who wanted to spend 100 million in advertising. But their client had no assets for us to hold on. And my global CFO asked me, why do you want like this business? Why would someone sleep on other people's bed when there could be bed bugs? So I said, what do you mean by that? He said, no one will want to sleep in someone's bed. So that company is called Airbnb. Right? They became a big client of mine, and today they spend about 1.5 billion advertising. And those days, we couldn't take the ads. We didn't want to take the ads because we have no securitization on the spend. In case they go bankrupt, we will be in trouble, right? So I left the corporate world because the disruption was getting so big, and I wanted to do for my clients. I have my own consultancy on transformation across Southeast Asia and Greater China. I work for many family businesses who want to reorganize and move fast. At the same time, I run 2 venture capitalists, and today I'm here as Quest Ventures. I come from a domain space, so my investment angle usually is, my thesis is based on go-to-market. I don't look at discounted cash flows, neither do I look at a person's history or his connections. I look at whether the product can hit the market and get it right straight away. And usually when I invest, I will put in money myself and bring in family offices, sovereign funds, private marketplaces, and many times also many rich individuals with connections. So my background is I'm doing this, I told my kids, I'm doing this to disrupt myself so that I leave the word. So here I am.
Cool. Okay. Thanks, everybody. So you started talking a bit about marketing. Let me come to Lisa on this one. So part of what I always ask myself, when should a startup, and when I think of startup, I think of newly formed, I think of seed capital or pre-seed. When should a startup start telling its story? How aggressively should the startup tell its story? Where is that line between hype and over-promotion and actually delivering something? And how do you tread that? So that's part of building an ecosystem, is creating enthusiasm and awareness. Lisa, how do you think, since you've consulted for a lot of different startups, how do you think of this idea of building a brand which goes on to build excitement about an ecosystem?
Yeah, I think it's super important to have a strong brand and a strong story, especially as a startup. Oftentimes you build out a technology or product and it's a little bit confusing how this really satisfies the needs. So you need to help the customer or consumer to kind of package this in a way that they understand it and also in a way that they feel that they really want it. Having said that, I'm not a big fan of spending a lot of money on advertising and promotion early on. It's often not worth it. But marketing is more than just, I mean, everyone in the room knows this. It's more than just advertising or promotion to sell something. It's also about gathering those insights from the market. So what we often do with various startups is that we can throw out a bunch of Google ads, right? Talking about the product. And if people click on there, instead of coming to a web page, you come to just a simple Google form saying, hey, great that you're interested in this type of product. We're currently doing some consumer research. Could you please help us answer these few questions? And then you, in a very, very cheap way, you do get answers from potential customers who are willing to click, and they were searching. They had some kind of intent with something regarding your product. And in a similar way, when you do get a bit further when it's time to position your brand in the market and position your product, you might as well run, 5 different types of ads that all have different positioning and key messaging, just to kind of see what gets the best responses. And if you want to build that further, you could have 5 different landing pages, and then you can see kind of what engages the audience the best, and that is kind of a little bit of trial and error before you start finding where the market really grasps your product, they understand it, and they do show a real intent. And a popular term is obviously the product market fit. When you reach that product market fit, that's when you can start scaling. And a lot of tech people tend to focus 99% of that product market fit onto the product. So they keep rebuilding and adjusting the product. In my point of view, you also have to spend time on kind of adjusting the market side of things. So you might have been trying to market to a specific kind of companies or consumers or geography, but your real market might be somewhere else. So as a marketer, especially in an early stage startups, I do think it's super important to take that piece of product or technology, try to package it in different ways, but also try to sell it and market it to various groups of target audiences. Because consumer market fit is really when there is a fit from both the tech and product perspective and the market. And the latter, I think, is often forgotten. So I think you can start early, but it doesn't mean that you should buy billboards, but it means that you should go early and test the waters.
So $1 million for a 30-second slot in a major sporting event may not be the best thing for an early stage company to focus on?
No.
Okay, so Barbara, Lisa was talking about product market fit. Your own experience when you were building your startup was the product market fit there? But you've now taken that experience to advise other entrepreneurs in Unilever. How do you think of this intersection between a major corporation and the earliest of startups, 2, 3 people? How do you think about this idea of product market fit when you bring these two together, the pilots, for example, that you run in Foundry?
First of all, there is one thing that we don't talk enough, and I really talk from my own experience. When I built my startup, we were 3, there is one thing that I have misevaluated is the passion and the certainty that what you're building is the right thing. And that's something that I do see in my role today. It's when you are an entrepreneur and when you're building a startup, you are so confident that you are doing the right thing. It's amazing. And when I'm going to tell you what was my startup, and everybody telling me, are you sure? Are you sure you want to do this in the US? I said, yeah, it's going to work. We wanted to duplicate Taobao model in the US. When you have Amazon and you have eBay, and we had 1.5 million. Of course, we have the best tech stack. We are solving a problem. It didn't work out. But, we were so passionate and convinced that we were doing the right thing. And that's where the role that I have today, it's very interesting because I'm at this crossroad, a center point between the brands and understanding their needs and having these entrepreneurs or small startup companies with great ideas. How do you get the two to talk the same language? What success look like for the startup is not what success look like for a brand. But still, you can help them to craft the right scope of work, the right KPIs, so both can experiment. Because when you work with the corporate, it's not only the corporate experimenting and trying new things, it's also the startup testing if actually what they are building will work for a big corporate like us. And there is another thing is, it's not all about big corporate. When you build a solution, yes, we might be a great target, a great fish to catch, if I can say, but sometimes these experimentation and pilots that we run help the startup to realize that the big FMCG company is not the right target audience, and there is still a market and a product fit for another type of company. So it's really about that collaboration when we run the pilot, really go both ways, both parties learn from each other, and what I'm trying and my team trying to do is really to give the right advice to the right people.
So potentially softening the edges of both coming together so that the fit is more ideal. Jeff, let me come to you for a minute as an investor, early stage investor. I want to pick up on what Barbara said, which is an entrepreneur is passionate, is committed, is focused that this is the right way. And you want that from an entrepreneur. You want someone to be completely committed and invested. But you need them to be open to feedback and to adjusting. How do you think of that as an investor?
I think one of the points that we have, let me rephrase myself. Coming from a marketing world, advertising world, we have a lot of acronyms and a lot of sexy phrases. We use that. I thought one of the best phrase to use in disruption world, in this world, is the word disruption. Many of the founders see the disruption they're doing in the business way, but they forget to see that the disruption they are also doing is in the human way of doing things. Many times when they try to, when the founders, I look at them, they come up with a great idea what they want to do, the young startups. They have a right feature, but they do not to espouse the benefit of the feature. So that benefit of feature might not be understood by who they are speaking to, because you're actually disrupting people's way of work. And the way of work, especially in good corporations and good companies, like, I won't mention names here, but the great Singapore government is one, right? Where you have a very established way of work. You have a great Six Sigma, standard operating procedure. Now, how are we going to throw away 30, 40 years worth of Six Sigma processes and standard operating procedure and let one young upstart who's in a t-shirt, hasn't showered for 3 days, and change the way you work? That's always been a challenge. And I look for this ability of the founders to be able to convince people why they want to change their way of work, right? So beyond that, I also look for a bunch of people, the youngsters. I see in them not just hunger and a wild passion, but the fact that they're very grounded and they can visualize the progress, how they are going to do. And many of these guys, I have a reverse way of looking at it, they'll be great hires for the corporate world if they fail. They'll be one of those best management trainees. You can see in them probably very good management trainees who one day will become a potential CEO. So those are the things I look for at a seed stage.
Can I just answer that quickly in terms of, because that's what we've been doing for the past 2 months now. We've really been pushing all of our teams to get customer validation. And when they don't get that from the market, then we literally force them to change their ideas. And customer validation, it's not about going out to a potential customer like Unilever and describing a dream world or a dream scenario, right? It's about describing something concrete that's here and now. And the best validation you can get is actually to get paid. So we have some of our companies, they were like, yes, this is our new HR tool. It's a $5,000 setup fee. And then people are paying. That's when you know that you're doing something right, right? If people are just saying, yes, it's good, let's meet again in 2 months, right? That's not customer validation. But if they show you the money, that's customer validation.
Okay. So let's come on to the topic of talent, because part of the theme here is building an ecosystem. And my personal belief is everything follows talent. Investors follow great talent. Customers follow great talent. Products are built by great talent. So let's touch on this concept of an Asia ecosystem. First of all, we'll say there isn't really an Asia, but we can talk about Southeast Asia or China or North Asia. But if we come on to this idea, Lisa, you're looking first, you're a talent first model. How does that work in a marketplace like Singapore, which isn't, we're blessed with lots of great talent, but like any ecosystem, we wish there was more great talent. How do you think of this idea of supply, constraint? Why Singapore as a place? Because you could have gone to Indonesia, for example, where there's a lot more human beings. How do you think of this talent first in Singapore?
We do actually have quite a few founders from Indonesia because it's a great talent base. And we do have founders from 22 countries. However, like a lot of them are, like the biggest group are Singaporeans. And I do think Singapore has a great talent pool. But the talent in Singapore is a little bit trapped in corporates and the government. and in big technology startups. So they might sit on Google and edit a button and something like that. And we think maybe the world would be a better place if instead of editing that button, you actually come and build a company and solve a problem that needs solving. So we are actually actively approaching people who we see have a great background, and then of course you have to meet them and evaluate if that's true and if they starting something on their own is something they want to do. But I think there is not a lack of talent here, but I think both from a cultural perspective and just like tradition, very talented people kind of enjoy having a good paycheck and a nice life. Startup life is not really nice, right? But it could be in a couple of years from now. So we try to find those people and to kind of find those people with that aspiration and heart to go into the entrepreneurship world. So I think it's about finding them.
And it's also, I guess, this idea of the whole company, because if we had a room full of just amazing scientists or just amazing marketers, so any company is built by a complementary set of skills. When you think of talent, Barbara, does Unilever or any big corporation use these sorts of in-house innovation labs as a way of trying to figure out who they would love to hire? Or do they say, no, although we'd love to hire you, continue to build your startup even if it means that we don't get you? How do corporates look at this issue?
Yeah, so I do hear a lot of corporates leveraging hackathons or those kind of experimental days, because hackathons is over 2-3 days only, to actually identify and get to work and hire those new talent. DBS is doing it very, very well, but it's meant to be for a recruitment purpose. It's not what we're doing in Unilever. First of all, I'm not pushing a lot on hackathons. It's very difficult to execute post-hackathon. We've done one, actually, and with Grow Asia, and what we are seeing, what I've seen from the Unilever point of view is, we have identified that team. We see the team as a leveraged team. It's an outside team, but it's a way for us to keep working on those projects, leveraging the talent, but not disrupting them from what they want to do. Because, you know, first of all, they not all live in Singapore. They are a different and mixed team. So we are a lot more cautious there. We do a lot more activation in new universities, etc. However, I do think that the level 3 space or the foundry space are helping to build the employer brandability for Unilever. It's helping. It's still too young, I guess, to really say that it's attracting people for that.
Jeff, we were talking off stage a little bit about this idea of digital transformation, corporate transformation. A lot of corporates look for early stage companies because they hope to be able to capture that sort of mindset and that sort of pixie dust, that if they can only bring a startup in, the corporation will sort of undergo this transformation. Many times it happens in reverse, which is the startup gets sort of squashed. But when you take a look at bringing together corporates and startups through your prior life, M&A and so on, how do you think of this idea of transformation?
I think this is another one of those sexy advertising words, transformation. I think often we see a couple of things. We see that on either side, the startup or the new tech company you bring in, on the corporate side, we see the people who are comfortable being uncomfortable. And that is a criteria I look for. People who can operate in the areas of gray. Most engineers are very binary. It's either 1 or 2, or 0 or 1. Most people who have in their lives in the corporate world is also very clear. They have their balanced scorecard bonuses in place. So it's again very binary. But when you bring a force like this, when you are seeing the marketplace that you used to is being changed, when you put these things together, you will start to see the real issues, right? And many issues of these are all personal and cultural. I see many companies, many of my clients, my transformation unit, are Asian SMEs who have 3,000 to 4,000 people coming from Taiwan, in Middle East to Southeast Asia. Most of them are worried that they will not be able to hire young people because all the young people will join Facebook and Google or the startups. So when I looked at them, I tell them that to get the right kind of transformation, you've got to bring people in from the outside. A startup that's important. Besides bringing a startup in, immediately you've got to identify 10 people in your corporate world that you can put in work in a startup. Then we move a couple of people from the startup into the corporate world itself. Then we see whether the marriage, this arranged marriage works. I mean, I know love can develop after arranged marriage sometimes. It does happen, right? For in this transformation world. Then the second part usually comes about is when decision-making structures happens. You see suddenly a group of people in a corporate world losing their commissions because the marketplace is flatter. And these people have been very loyal to the company. They've been making money for the company. Now they lose all their commissions because the middleman business is gone. How do you handle that? And this is where usually what I call the line is drawn in the sand. That's when you decide whether you want to stay or go. And many times I tell clients this is the critical part. When you go to lose the very essence that used to bring you to where you were last time, you're going to lose and throw it all away out the window. That's the toughest part.
I'm sorry.
No, yeah, there is one thing that we are actually starting experimenting and doing in the Philippines. We have been working with a startup, and what we are doing, we are doing a talent swap. So the HR is actually asking me, how can we identify the startups who will be ready to do that swap? The difficulty, though, is depending on the age and the stage of the startups. It's to have Unilever people, many wants to go to the startup side. But the startup talent, it's actually a little more difficult to get them to understand that they will learn as much as they need for their own benefit as well. So at the moment we've started the swap, it's us going to the startup, one lady, and then once she's finished, we will swap back on the other side. So I'll let you know how it works.
Cool. Are there questions? Because it's always the first question that's the trickiest. Is there anybody that would like to?
There's one right
Oh, sorry, it's hard to see with the lights. Yes, please. I don't know if there's a mic or if you just want to shout.
Yeah, I think good discussion. Thank you. This is Jayesh from Jungle Ventures. You guys didn't talk much about economics, so this was good about building the ecosystem, but what about dollars and cents and exits?
Okay, so let me jump on to a question that I had in my pocket, Jayesh, which is, do we need big exits to build an ecosystem? And I'm going to use the word with intent, big exits, because I would argue personally that DeepMind exiting at plus or minus 500 million wasn't a big exit in comparison to IPOs or something that's more eye-popping. But I would argue also that it was an amazing, if I can use the word, transformation, because now there's really something happening in London around AI. So do we need exits? Do we need big exits? How do we think about this to build an ecosystem? Anyone, everyone?
I mean, I can start. Yes, we do. I mean, looking at various startups hubs around the world, what really creates those hubs is having those exits and what they create. So when a company is exiting or going really, really well so people can sell as secondaries, you create like a pool of early employees who get a lot of money in their hands. They can become really good angel investors with a lot of experience and network that can really help the next generation of entrepreneurs. And that's been going on for, I don't know, 50 years now in Silicon Valley. It's been going on for 20 years up in the Nordics and so forth. It's been going on for like 5-6 years here. So I think it's just a matter of timing. Having said that, it's not the exit per se, but like leading up to that exit is often a lot of exit opportunities for the early investors and the early employees. What we've seen here a little bit though is that people are a little bit more reluctant to giving away equity to early employees. I think that is a big mistake. I think a lot of people should be having the same incentives, and when those big exits happens, you have hundreds of people who are super smart, super connected, have a lot of experience and money to put into all of these new startups that can be created. That's when you create an ecosystem. So I hope, I mean, every time I can, like now, I'm always pushing for like, give some equity to the early employees. And that's when we really can create this ecosystem.
So let me push a bit further on this one then, because if we said exits, so for example, Google bought Pi, there's lots of really interesting companies that are starting to come to life in Singapore. Would it be ecosystem building if 10 companies went out at 100 million each in trade sales, or would it be ecosystem building if there were 2 quote-unquote unicorns that went out and had all the front page news? Are they equivalent in terms of ecosystem effect?
I think you always need like really, really strong role models. So you need like world champions, and those world champions are the big unicorns that are really making headlines not only here in Southeast Asia but around the world. And that's when you really, like when you have those global successes, that's when people really are getting inspired and so forth. So I do think you need those big ones for kind of creating that hype and story. But in economical terms, of course, I mean, there's not a lack of money here. It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
So I think those big ones are needed.
Jeff, you have something?
I think the exit phrase today is a lot more sophisticated than in the past. In the past, it was always about a trade sale or IPO, and more and more the startup founders, and when they do the paid proof of concepts, they realize that many of the companies they are working with have an inherent weakness somewhere. So those companies, those opportunities that they identify where there's inherent weakness, it becomes a very clear case of a potential trade sale or acquisition or acqui-hire, where the platform later on will become a SaaS for the rest of the companies. I've seen a lot of the investments across some of my other VCs in QVest and also with Temasek, where you see a corporate world working with a startup realizing that, hey, this is our Achilles heel for a long time. And then when you see when they bring it in to work, and then the kind of value-based pricing they create in their products, then that exit itself is even bigger, because you become such a big part of a company. And later on, it gets passed out, and it becomes IPO as a subsidiary of the big company that's already been listed. So we see that the exit, we are getting a bit more, what I call more adult discussions these days, right? Realizing the value of the product that's being created. And it's not just one straight way. I work for it for 3 years, I throw it out and I go buy my yacht, and I go invest 10 million in cryptocurrencies. It doesn't work that way anymore. It doesn't work just that one way. We're also seeing a lot of people holding the assets that they buy in-house, and wanting to put it as part of some of the parts for a company. I've got a couple of partners in Indonesia. When they look at the start, they bring it in, they say that later on, when this value right now, if we exit, is this much, but we put it together, some of the parts, the big banks will even value us much higher for the whole organic group. So I think the conversations are a lot more wider, and the people who are now joining the conversations are also a lot more senior experience coming in.
So we need exits in order to recycle, because if we're not unlocking early investment capital, there's nothing to come back and keep recycling. So we need some wins. The SGX has historically not been the destination where people go for those big listings, but I know there's a lot of discussion at the SGX. How can the stock exchange become a more attractive place for some of these, and retail investors and so on? Is there another question? I've got a few in my pocket, but I'd love to see if there's more in your mind. Okay, let me then jump to the idea of IP, because building an ecosystem, do we need to think about IP? Let me pose a question. You can have a particular model, let's talk about a Rocket Internet type model, where you would say, this works amazingly well in market X, let's have it work in market Z. Do we want to think about IP, which is, how is a university ecosystem producing a lot of amazing intellectual property? How do we build on that intellectual property? Is there a right, a wrong, a different path when we think about heavy IP versus it's not happening in Indonesia, so let's import a somewhat current model to build an ecosystem? Anyone?
Sorry, I'll take a pun on that one. I think this in the early years, in the early stages, these IP transposing IP across markets work when people are new and looking at things. More and more, I think the IP moving across markets are being challenged by many geography sovereignties. Many companies, many countries actually, now it's not about companies, not about corporates, it's about countries. Many countries have lost taxes collectible from the past with the disruption world, where things are moving across borderlessly and services are being delivered across. And then the people who are running it are payment services that exist in either paid through Ireland or Amsterdam, where they won't get taxed. So many geographies are losing, many countries are losing their tax ability to collect tax. In that respect, they're also enacting a lot of regulations. So I think this, a lot of the disruption business models going through, the biggest challenge going forward will now be about regulations that are being enacted, yeah, right? And many of them are knee-jerk regulations. They are done to either moderate the disruption or to allow the government a chance to participate in it, and then draw the industry, draw that IP into their ecosystem, so it becomes one of their strengths. My point of view from this arose from many of the fintech and many of the e-commerce, digital commerce and companies we venture into. We realize that more and more the markets are trying, more and more the geographies are all trying to find ways to tap on them, to tax the customer for using them, instead of letting them operate in the free zone, because they need the tax money to run their country. So that has become a rising theme, and it's been a tough area for many of the investors, VCs, and that's why my last few deals, I try to get a legal person on board, right, a lawyer on board, how to do the lobbying part, because especially in the digital commerce space.
I think if you really want to create a global success, if you do have, I mean, whether or not it's actually like filing for like a patent or like IP in that way, but if you do have true product innovation, that's when you really can scale something globally. If you only are adapting, I mean, I don't want to, I mean, what Rocket has been doing in this region has been pretty incredible, right? It's not that easy to start doing logistics in Indonesia or Vietnam. It's a lot of work, but if you do have true product innovation, that's when you also can scale globally, and you're also doing something different that's not currently available anywhere else. And that's when you see the global market as your default market. So I think in order to create those really big successes, you definitely need to have innovation, whether it's actually like, you know, technicalities in filing for the patents, but really true product innovation where you get that massive scale. Because it's hard to get the massive scale. We usually divide companies into like, is this an execution-heavy company? i.e. the idea and product market fit is there in another market and we can just execute locally, or is this a product-heavy company? And I think the scale is definitely in the product.
And this is how you can start to position Singapore and Southeast Asia on the world map, I would say, of ecosystem building. And a lot of people are talking about the Silicon Valley. A lot of people are asking and wondering whether Singapore or Southeast Asia will be the next Silicon Valley. Well, I don't think that's the question. The question is, what model are we currently building here out of Singapore, but also the region? And we need those to be bigger than just a red dot, I would say. And we have to think in terms of talent, not only Singapore, but the entire region, IP in the entire region, and therefore we can get scale. But it is difficult when you build a company and an IP for the region, Southeast Asia. I put China and India a little bit separate, but for Southeast Asia, it is difficult to then go to Europe or to US, especially for consumer product. I have seen, and I'm working with a couple of startups who are more on the enterprise tech, on the analytics and the AI, who are currently moving to Europe from Singapore. So it's happening, it will happen if we keep nurturing that ecosystem.
Okay, we have about 2 minutes left, so I'm going to take a risk and go back one more time and see if anybody had a question. Okay, then here's my bias. I think one of the great opportunities for Singapore in particular, or for Asia if we want to be very inclusive, is hard tech or deep tech, and trying to build on the commitment to science and education that I think is becoming more and more globally recognized as a hallmark. The days, my personal bias is the days of China as a lower cost imitation is gone. A lot of amazing, original, heavy tech. But Singapore has great education institutions, great commitment to research. So maybe our edge, our advantage, is around hard tech in our ability to try and build an ecosystem that includes more of the science and the investment community. The challenge is the curve is different. It takes a long time to validate and build and gain adoption if you're talking about something to do with nanosatellites or autonomous vehicle. Just in your own closing comments, how do you think we can best build an ecosystem? And we'll give credit to Singapore. How can we best build an ecosystem including Singapore as part of Asia? Is it talent? Is it investment? Is it IP? Is it just taking a bigger risk? You know, what's the sort of thing that comes to your mind as you first think of that?
I mean, there are so many things talking for Singapore. It has a perfect location. It's so global. Every person you meet here, you ask them, so where are you from? Well, grew up there, my dad is from there, mom is from there, right? Everyone is global here. And everyone has a very, very global mindset. So I couldn't imagine a better place geographically position than Singapore, because you have the proximity to both India, China, but then you also have culturally to US, Australia, UK, and so forth. So there is that, and I think it's just about using that and being global and not being fooled by trying to do something that becomes a little success here in Singapore, because that's nothing. You have to be playing in the top league.
Think big, not small.
Yeah.
Barbara.
Thank you.
I think from Unilever point of view, I mean, if you just look at Unilever Foundry, the only team that we have is London and Singapore, and the rest of the world is working by network and champions. So I think the company do value Singapore as a growth engine and opportunities to find startups and develop relationship. From the deep tech and art tech subject that we are talking here, and we've been talking, it's difficult for us. We don't have R&D here, and we don't develop product here. But still, I brought into my team an R&D person that will be the bridge between the ecosystem in Singapore and the region, but also with the ecosystem in London, Europe, India, and the US. So I think, yes, it's a great place. As long as you don't isolate yourself and run your own thing, you always have to think scale, whether you work with the marketing ad tech startups or R&D or supply chain. It's always with the scale in mind. So,
okay, thank you. Jeff?
I think today's addressable audience is not determined by their passport. Most of the businesses today, most of the big businesses today, when they market across the world, they look at people's needs rather than which country they are from. I think, as you can see from the advertising and marketing campaigns, they are more international and global than they used to be. Many of the investments I have across in the last 4 or 5 years, the legal entity is in Singapore, but 90% of their client base are outside Singapore. I've got a couple of corporate transformation clients, one in Indonesia and one in Philippines. Their focus is on the market. My Philippine client is focused on the 30 million Filipinos working outside Philippines. How do I reach 30 million people in 130 markets when I am not a P&G that's operating in 130 markets? I operate only in Philippines. How do I reach out to these 30 million Filipinos outside Philippines who are making all the money working overseas and sending money back? Same for Indonesia as well. So the idea of scale takes a different look. And the place that can ferment this kind of thinking requires a lot of continuous stimulation. I feel that Singapore, to has done very well coming to where it is today, attracting all the right hardware, the right people, the right policies and stuff. What they need to do is to maybe maintain it like a sauna bath, keep the water running and keep the plug pulled so the cold water goes out, hot water comes in. Then you keep the right temperature that you want. I think the environment allows for that kind of metabolism to happen, but at the same time, this conversation that we have on this stage needs to be continuously verbalized and be deliberate about it. Many times we don't talk openly about what this is done, because you don't talk about it, no one knows exactly what the status is. And if you don't do that, then you will never have a clear view on how you're moving together as one.
Okay, so with that in mind, Singapore, we can say safely Singapore can certainly do it. Singapore has all the inputs, so Singapore can do it. Singapore, frankly, must do it in order to continue to reinvent its own economic future. And I hope we can safely say together, Singapore will do it. So with that in mind, thanks everybody. And